My name is Dr. Rick Seguil.
And action. Hey, Jay had a... This is Kirk again. And action. Hey everyone, Maureen had a question about protein and cancer. So I've done a couple of videos on protein recently and how much you should be doing, especially with exercise. On days that you exercise and also on days that you don't exercise. It essentially came down to how much per day. And the easy measurement was broken down on, I think it was a board like this. So check it out, please. But here's the argument. So Maureen is an athlete, cyclist, but unfortunately she broke her leg. So she's out of commission for a short time. She's also older than 60. And the problem that will come across is you're going to need some kind of exercise. So she'll find her way. But she's a breast cancer survivor. So in the time period that she is not exercising as actively as before, that's putting in miles with the bike, and because she's recently surviving the cancer, how much protein is necessary to keep muscle from breaking down, so to stimulate muscle protein synthesis, but at the same time, how much is the ceiling before cancer gets turned on? If this is the first time you're finding me though, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below and the alert button to find out when I do new videos. So protein and cancer. So if you look back to a lot of observational and epidemiological studies like T. Colin Campbell and the China study, there's going to be an association between animal protein and cancer. His studies, I think, linked it in the Philippines to casein. That's protein found in cow milk. And it was observational, which has some strengths to its study. And there's a correlation. Now the problem with observational studies is that there's some error involved in recording the data. There's also a lot of variables. You can sometimes select out if you analyze the data properly, but the new scientists, or the younger scientists from today, specifically the ones that like ketosis and animal protein and paleo, or carnivore diets, they will go against those old studies and say, hey, you need more refined study. And it's very hard to do a nutritional study, because a long-term nutritional study, because you have to lock to eliminate all the variables and make sure you have a cause and effect relationship between protein and cancer, for example, or protein and muscle building. You have to lock people in, control all variables, feed them exactly what you want to test, and then measure things. And that's just very hard to do, and it's very expensive. So there's smaller studies, case studies that have some strength, but I think if you look overall, you can look at the observational epidemiologics, you can look at the mechanistic studies, you can look at the animal studies. If you put everything together, and again, like what integrative medicine doctors do, we look at the patient that we're talking to in the room, we analyze the goals, the history, the struggles of that patient, and then we use data to extrapolate a specific plan, personal plan, design plan as far as nutrition. So if you do things individually for a cancer survivor like Maureen, I would try to limit the protein. Now, again, because protein specifically turns on in all the old mechanistic studies, higher protein content, especially from animal, mostly red meat, would increase IGF-1 and mTOR. If you stimulate both of those are things that float around in the bloodstream and on the cell. If you stimulate that, there's a higher chance that if there's a precancer somewhere in the body, and everybody has precancers, but our hunter cells usually destroy those precancers. But if you have enough protein, you might stimulate IGF-1 and mTOR, and that will turn a precancer into a full-blown cancer in a matter of time. That's the theory. Again, it's hard to limit all the variables to that theory, but here is Maureen. She's a cancer survivor, so I would say, Maureen, you might want to limit your protein intake. But at the same time, Maureen's also an athlete, and she's older than 60, and she's struggling because she can't exercise like before. So in this case, I don't want her, and she runs the risk of osteoporosis. So I don't want her to go into muscle atrophy. So I want her to develop some type, without screwing up the broken leg, develop some type of upper body exercise routine, which is tough for patients, especially when they're used to cycling, but we can do it. Now, if we start on this course while we're waiting for that broken leg to heal up, of pushing protein a little bit because we're expecting some aches and pains, lactic acid tolerance, a lot of high learning curve pain, I would say we want protein for that reason, because if the muscle is stimulated, pushed to the point of breaking down, you're going to need protein in your diet to supplement and stimulate protein synthesis. So protein catabolism can happen when you don't exercise. She's not going to do that. She's an avid elderly athlete. I hate to say elderly, she's really healthy, but older athlete. So I think that following the standard criteria suggested by most dietary American organizations, 0.8 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, I think that's too low. If you look at the work of Stuart Phillips or Don Lehman, Stuart Phillips is out of McMaster University in Canada. Don Lehman's out of University of Illinois. He's an emeritus at this point. But Stuart Phillips found that as you got older, the older athlete had a little bit more difficulty stimulating muscle growth. So they really had to maximize on protein. Even Walter Longo's work had suggested that as you get older, you might want to increase protein to prevent muscle catabolism, muscle breakdown. So Walter Longo, more cancer. Stuart Phillips, more exercise physiologist for athletes. I think we can, that's where we use, maybe I'm cherry picking the information, but I want to put together a program for this particular patient. And if we get to the point of really turning on the upper body as far as exercise, while we wait for the 12 weeks obligatory get off your feet, let the bone heal up, I think I would maximize at 1.4 to 1.6 grams per kilo. And that's going to have to be over the course of the healing time. Now, the question will be animal versus plant. I would always go plant. So plant-based protein you have protein in plant. I mean, you can get protein in the form of powder if you find it's too much volume. You can also do protein in the form of nuts, seeds, legumes, beans, which is great. Tofu, only if it's organic. I don't like genetically modified tofu, but there's many different varieties of tofu, many different varieties of dark leafy greens, broccoli, powders, protein powders in the form of brown rice, pea protein, hemp protein. Hemp protein's got a great amino acid profile. Whatever protein powder you take, though, it's supposed to have, because of the work of Don Lehman, at least 2.5 grams of leucine to be stimulating to muscle growth. So of that 100, and I calculated out in my video before, came out to about 100 grams of protein per day. You can't do that all at once because the gut can only absorb a little bit at a time. I believe it's 25 to 30 grams. Usually a scoop of protein powder from a plant or from whey if you want to go whey, but that's animal. It's about 20 with plant and about 25 to 30 with whey or animal protein. So casein, whey. Again, if you look at T. Colin Campbell's information from the China study, there's a correlation, a suggestion that a cow casein was associated with liver cancer. So again, and even the World Health Organization has deemed processed meat as being a carcinogen equal to that of asbestos and tobacco use. So you have big organizations, it's either the World Health Organization or the IARC, but the suggestion is that processed meat's not good. If you're going to eat meat, you probably shouldn't char broil it, because the higher the temperature, especially if the meat's over direct flame, you produce these things called HCAs, and that has been associated with cancer. Again, there's way too many variables to say one particular macronutrient equals cancer. You'd have to limit it, but in an average American household or an average American lifestyle, I think if you don't exercise, I would decrease the cancer. But in Maureen's case, where she does exercise and she's older than 60, I think it would be worthy to stimulate muscle. And here's, with the cherry picking information I got, the difference is that if you have a couch potato that takes in high protein, I think you're asking for trouble, especially with a history of breast cancer. Turning on, or the HER2 positives, or even the negatives, more animal protein, I think, is asking for trouble. If you have an athlete, even if they have, if they're a cancer survivor, if you have an athlete though, I think that the benefits of protein supplementation, they are to turn on and supplement that muscle that is being worked on or asked or tasked to develop. And when you have exercise, even though you're taking the protein and making IGF-1 and mTOR turn on, I think that if you look at what happens to the brain and muscle with people who exercise, it works to make the brain and muscle more efficient, also healthy. So if you can turn on those microglia to clean up all the crap in the brain, and if you can turn the muscle into a carbohydrate, anti-diabetic muscle or gland, that's where you can get the benefits. So it's kind of a trickle down and link-to-link assessment of protein, but I think overall, if I have an athlete, they're already beating the odds as far as getting cancer. If I have an athlete that eats properly and maybe maximizes on protein, again, another feather in the cap on beating cancer. If you have an athlete that maximizes on protein, exercises older than 60, and trying to put in at least 2.5 grams of leucine, exercising 90 minutes a week, moderate to intense, I think your chances for cancer are even lower than a person that doesn't do all that. So in a roundabout way, Maureen, hopefully you get it. I would suggest that you're going to beat the cancer with your exercise if we feed the muscle the right amount of protein, which is going to be about 100 grams per day, and making 2.5 of those grams leucine. I think you're going to turn on muscle, cool down the brain inflammation, and even beat the odds further. So hopefully this gives you an idea, and all of you that are on the fence as far as if you've survived cancer, cool. Or if you have a family member that's surviving cancer, cool. If you're trying to prevent cancer because it runs in your family, cool. Exercise the heck out of your life. Bring down your total body weight. Maybe try to switch over to a whole food, mostly plant-based diet. I'm a vegetarian. I used to be a pescatarian, but I stopped fish when a friend of mine, Bob, suffered a heart attack in the fall, and I'm going to stay at what I'm doing now, which is veganism. I haven't found any decrease in any effectiveness of exercise. Problem solving is great, sleep is great, so I like where it's at, and if I can beat the odds, I have 2 risks for cancer in my family. If I can beat the odds, why not? So subscribe down below. Don't forget to put your comments on how you might incorporate protein in your diet and how you exercise when you're injured. Perhaps you can help Maureen.